Hey, this is Leo for Actualized.org. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the dark side of meditation. Please tell me that by this point, you have a meditation practice installed in your life where you're meditating every single day for however many minutes. Please tell me you've got that going. If you don't, this is the number one habit that you can install in your life that will completely transform everything. You cannot be following Actualized.org and not meditating, all right? That's not going to work because the stuff I'm going to be talking about in the future, and already much of the stuff I'm talking about, is going completely over your head because you have no idea what awareness or what consciousness really are and how little of it you have unless you started meditating. So that's for the newbies. But what I'm talking about in this episode is really some advice for those of you who've already installed the habit, have been meditating, and are now starting to reach into the intermediate and the advanced stages of meditation. So this means you've been meditating consistently every single day for at least 6 months or 12 months or a couple of years. And then what's going to happen is weird stuff will arise as you meditate. And you will discover, perhaps in a shocking way, that meditation is not all rainbows and butterflies the way you initially assumed. Some of the stuff that comes up is freaky, weird, downright alien, and very negative sometimes. And it can blindside you and sabotage your meditation habit. So what I'm going to talk about here is the dark side. Stuff that's counterintuitive, stuff that you would not expect to arise from a simple meditation habit. So what is this stuff? Well, there's a whole list. Now, before I tell you all this stuff, I want to preface it by saying that you're not necessarily going to encounter all this. So don't go hunting for it, because a lot of this stuff can be negative. And if you don't experience it, that's fine. These are like side effects, right? If a drug has side effects, that means it can happen. It doesn't mean that it will happen to you. But if it does happen to you, a lot of this stuff is very common. Don't be surprised. You've been warned. So firstly, expect hyper annoyance and crankiness. This is very common. And usually it comes in spells. Like, you're meditating for weeks, everything's going great. You're becoming more calm and more peaceful. And then you reach 1 week in your meditation routine where you're just annoyed by everything, hyper annoyed by little tiny insignificant things that you would think you're totally beyond, like the air conditioning or the humming of your refrigerator will start to annoy the hell out of you, or maybe your cat or your dog will start to annoy the hell out of you for no reason, no good reason. And that might take you by surprise. Or you just become cranky and you have this kind of spell of crankiness that lasts for a few days or for an entire week or maybe for an entire month. Also expect hyper-judgmentalism. When you become hyper-judgmental of everyone around you, especially people that are close to you, like your family, your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your children, and so forth. Expect that. That will come about in spells. Again, might last for a few days, might last for a week, might last for a whole month. And I don't want you to be blindsided by that. Expect wild mood swings. Up and down and up and down. Mood swings that can last from days to weeks, where you feel terrible or you feel really high, like you're on cloud 9, because you've been meditating now and you're getting growth and everything's feeling wonderful. And you think that's just how it is now. That's your new level. You think you've arrived. But then a few weeks pass and then you crash into some deep depression and you wonder to yourself, oh no, I lost it. What happened? I thought I arrived. But see, that was just a wrong expectation. The fact is you will have many wild mood swings throughout your entire meditation career. So get used to that. Also expect feelings of loneliness to come over you sometimes. Expect feelings of disgust, anger, and frustration. And these can vary from very mild forms of these emotions to very, very heavy forms where you just feel like you're the most lonely, isolated human being on the entire surface of the earth. Or you're just completely pissed off and angry about the political party and what it's doing to the country or whatever, right? So this stuff will happen to you if you're going to be meditating for years. Expect crying. Sometimes you will cry. Totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. Expect insomnia. Sometimes you're going to have these manic episodes where you have a lot of energy come up and you're not going to be able to fall asleep because you're excited either by new possibilities or you're agitated or anxious about something. That might happen. Expect depression and meaninglessness to wash over you. I can almost guarantee that if you're going to meditate for longer than a year, that you will be hit by some serious spells of depression. And that's totally normal. That's par for the course. And you will at times feel like your entire life is meaningless. Everything you've done is meaningless. Your family is meaningless. Your career is meaningless. Your relationships are meaningless. Even meditation is meaningless and self-improvement is meaningless. All of this, you'll experience all this stuff. This is just par for the course. Also expect to have interference with your work and your career from your meditation habit. You're going to be meditating, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, my work and my career, it's so meaningless. Why am I putting all this effort and all this emotional labor into it? And so you might want to quit your career, or you might get disgusted by it or whatever. That's totally normal. And usually that comes and it passes. So the trick with all these things is to not get triggered by them and then to make some sort of rash move as a reaction against just this emotional energy, this negative emotional energy, or this fear or this self-doubt that's bubbling up from inside of you, right? Because that's what meditation is doing, is it's surfacing stuff from your deep subconscious mind. And that stuff comes up to the surface. But if you don't expect that, then that's when you can get into trouble, because you will then react against that stuff, which is largely illusory. But then you reacting to it, that can cause some real damage in your life. Also expect interference with relationships, especially your closest intimate relationship with your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend, and also your family relationships, right? You might feel like, oh, what am I doing in this relationship? Why am I even married to this person? We're such a wrong match, and you're going to get all this kind of self-doubt going. That's totally normal. Expect some rash judgments. Like you might feel like, oh, okay, I got to quit my job, and I got to get a divorce, and I got to drop my family and my children, and I got to move to a cave in India. You might have some sort of fantasy like that come into your mind while you're meditating. And then you think like, okay, that's what I got to do now. And then you go and actually do it. And the mistake is to act on that too quickly without letting that plan or this fantasy just kind of like work its way through you. Usually what will happen is it'll pass in a few days. So be aware of that. And other kinds of rash judgments. You might have a rash judgment to sell your IRA and to liquidate all your stocks and all your assets and to donate all that money to charity. And then if you act on that too quickly, you might come to regret that. Also expect suicidal thoughts. I can almost guarantee that if you are meditating effectively, you will have more suicidal thoughts than you've probably ever had in your life. And that's if you're a normal person. I'm not talking about suicidal people. I'm talking about totally normal people. Me, from my meditation habit, I never have really suicidal thoughts. But from my meditation habit alone, the more I meditate, the more suicidal thoughts I have. And that's totally fine. I recognize that. I don't take them very seriously. And therefore, they don't bother me. But someone who's not expecting that could get freaked out by that and could actually maybe think that they're going to take action on it, which could become a problem. Expect some freak out moments. Some days you just start to freak out and you're not even sure why. You get into an argument with your spouse or with your children for no good reason. You're just blaming them for stuff, or you're just agitated at them. You're snapping at them. You're being passive aggressive, this sort of stuff. That could happen. Definitely expect ego backlash. This will surely happen to you at one point or another. And it'll happen many times. And what I mean by ego backlash is that as you're meditating, you're dissolving your ego over time. That's basically what you're doing. But when the ego gets dissolved too much, too fast, what it does is it tends to come back with even more force than it had before. And when it does, it starts to really behave in nasty, petty, egotistical ways, which is exactly why you might start to get into arguments with people that otherwise you shouldn't have gotten into. You might turn back to old habits that you've worked through already. Like you might go binging on ice cream and on greasy food, even though you've already cleaned up your diet. You might go binge on television, even though you've stopped watching television for years. You might go start doing drugs again, or alcohol, or smoking cigarettes, even though you haven't done that for years. You might go on a sex binge and go sleep with a bunch of random strangers on one-night stands, even though you don't usually do that. You might get addicted to money again. Maybe you've weaned yourself off the pursuit of money and the pursuit of success in business, and then you've been meditating a lot, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, my business, I got to get back to my business. I got to earn more money. And then you'll go and start chasing that again. So this is all stuff that I call ego backlash. And this can feel demoralizing because it feels like you're taking a step backwards. Because here you are meditating for years, and now you're eating junk food, doing drugs, and chasing money again. Like, what's this about? I thought I was supposed to be growing and becoming more spiritual, and it seems like I'm just regressing. But that's just a phase. That's something you have to work through and go further. And what I've noticed is that every time I have a strong ego backlash, if I am mindful and vigilant of it and just kind of sort of avoid the most negative behaviors, try to limit the most negative behaviors possible with that backlash and just kind of monitor it, then usually within a couple of weeks it dissolves and then I'm back better than ever. Right? So with all these things, you have to understand that these are temporary. And when we're told that meditation makes us more spiritual, makes us more aware, dissolves our ego and all this other good stuff, it makes us calmer and happier. That's true, but only in the long run is that true. That's not true in the short run. That's where people really go wrong, is that they assume it's just going to be a straightforward, positive, linear progression from the moment they start meditating. And that's just completely unrealistic. Expect hyper horniness. Sometimes you're going to be meditating, and maybe you've got off porn and you stopped having frivolous sex, and then you just have this spell of incredible horniness and you want to like jerk off every day, or you want to go have sex with a bunch of people. And it's like you can't get it out of your system. It's just like it feels like there's this like horniness coursing through you. That will happen. Expect old repressed memories to come bubbling up. Stuff that you have completely forgotten about, stuff you might think you've worked through. It's going to be some traumatic stuff, especially if you had traumas in your childhood, stuff that you've repressed, stuff that was very negative, maybe examples like abuse, sexual abuse, any kind of like near-death experiences that you've had, bullying, humiliation, embarrassment, like all this kind of stuff that you would normally not want to think about, that will come bubbling up. Also, family stuff will come bubbling up because many of your memories, the earliest memories you have, are of your childhood. And especially if you had a turbulent childhood, which wasn't all rainbows and butterflies, then definitely expect that stuff to come up, and definitely expect all sorts of family issues like mommy issues, daddy issues, sibling rivalries, resentments, like all that kind of stuff. It'll all come up. Expect crazy monkey mind. Expect sometimes to have waves of insanity and madness wash over you, where you just feel like your mind is like a swarming hive of bees. And the more you try to control it, the less you control it. The more out of control it gets. And you just sit down, you try to meditate, you try to do your normal technique, and nothing is working. None of your normal techniques are working. Expect self-doubt, where you start to doubt yourself, you start to doubt your technique. Like this technique has been working for months, and now it just feels like, oh man, this technique, it stopped working, it's not working anymore. Expect that. Expect nightmares. Expect weird dreams, where in your dreams you're living out weird fantasies like having sex with your mother, or killing people, or butchering your dog with a cleaver or something like that. Like, unpleasant images in your mind when you're sleeping. That will come up. And expect spiritual arrogance, where you start to believe that, oh yeah, I've been meditating for a few years now. Look at how unconscious everybody else is around me. Look at all the unconscious stuff they do. And so you're going to develop that, and then you're going to probably go around and preach to those people, and you're going to tell them, look, you should do what I'm doing. Meditate more, and then you'll experience all this good stuff that I'm experiencing. But later you'll recognize that, oh, that's just me at an intermediate stage, thinking that I'm at the highest stage. But then later I realized that, oh, that was just an intermediate stage. It wasn't nearly the highest stage. That spiritual arrogance was actually a function of my unconsciousness. And so that will happen to you. Now, this whole list of stuff, this is all quite common stuff. This is stuff that you should definitely expect. Don't be surprised at all if it happens to you, and not just once, but repeatedly. In fact, what you should start noticing is that it's a recurrent theme throughout long-term meditation, is that this stuff starts coming up. And some of it is very subtle. Sometimes this stuff happens to you and you're not even making an immediate connection between you getting into a fight with your spouse and the fact that that stemmed from your meditation practice. See, sometimes it's not an obvious connection. You'll only recognize it 2 days later after you've already gotten into a big argument, because you went unconscious and you forgot about these warning signs that I gave you. Now, what's going on here? Why is there this negative stuff with meditation? Isn't meditation supposed to just make us spiritual and more conscious? Well, it's a battle. It's a battle. Think about what's actually happening when you're meditating and when you're growing. To grow means you have to shed old patterns, old memories, old beliefs, old thought patterns. And how does that happen? Well, your mind, which is the entire collection of all that stuff, for it to grow, it needs to defragment itself and rearrange itself into a higher order, smoother functioning system. And how does it do that? By purging and working through and defragmenting all the shit that's in your mind. And if you're like the ordinary individual in mainstream society, then your mind is filled with so much shit that you don't even know how much is in there. It's everything you were taught since you were a kid. It's all the media that you ingested. It's all your religious, scientific, and political beliefs. It's everything your parents told you. It's everything your teachers told you. It's all the silly ideas that you thought were true when you were growing up, all the mistakes you've made, all the incorrect intuitions, all your fears, all that stuff. And that's the deep core of your mind. You're not conscious of most of that stuff. So when you're meditating, you're actually forcing your mind not to consciously work through that, but to unconsciously work through that. You are like literally defragmenting a hard drive. But unlike therapy, where you go to a therapist for years and you sit down on the couch and you talk and talk and talk about your problems, that's logical. That's conscious. When you're meditating, the exact same thing is happening as in therapy, but it's happening automatically, unconsciously in your mind. And the only signs of it that you're going to experience are these emotional swells, these mood swings, these reactions, this horniness, this depression, this sense of meaninglessness. That's how it's going to bubble up. And you've got to be smart enough and vigilant enough and conscious enough to be aware that that's what's happening here on the bigger picture. Always keep the bigger picture in mind. And this is the best reframe you can have for this stuff, is to see it as actually purging. This is actually called spiritual purification. You're purifying and purging all the toxic thoughts and emotions, and that process isn't always pleasant. But what's great about purification is that once the purification process completes itself, then you're left with a relatively clean, pure substance. And then that is what is going to be you 5, 10, 15 years from now. So you're not purified after a week of meditation. You're purified after a decade of meditation. And the purification, it comes in waves. It's like you're purifying yourself for a few weeks, for a few months, and then some big obstacle comes in your way and you got to really work through that and purge a lot of stuff. And that's when you have your emotional freakouts and mood swings. And then you purge that stuff after a few weeks, and then you get back and things are going nice and smooth. And now you're working at a higher level of consciousness until you hit the next obstacle. And then again, there's going to be a few weeks of turmoil, and then the next obstacle, and then the next obstacle, and that's going to continue for years. That's actually what you're aiming at with meditation. See? So the way that I reframe this in my mind is I tell myself, when I'm experiencing something negative, I tell myself, oh, this is actually a sign that I'm growing and that the process is working. And I'm excited by that. And that is enough to mollify any kind of depression that I have or any kind of like self-doubt that I have about this whole process. And that allows me to stay on track. Now, you might think that that's bad enough, but actually, I haven't gotten yet to the weirdest stuff. What I talked about so far is I gave you a list of the common stuff. Now let me give you a list of the really weird shit. Some of this stuff is incredible. You won't believe it's possible until it happens to you. So here's some of the weird side effects of meditation. You can expect tingling, jerking, shaking, and various pains throughout your body that feel very real. You can expect seeing lights and auras, bright lights of various kinds with your eyes open or with your eyes closed. And they can be animated, they can be very beautiful or very scary and menacing. And they can look very lifelike. You can also expect to see vivid sexual fantasies. You might even see fantasies of the opposite pole of your sexuality. So if you're heterosexual, you might start to see homosexual fantasies. And they might be completely lifelike. Not just like a little daydream, but like fully lifelike. And of course, those will tend to seduce you off the path. You might start to behave like an animal. Like literally, you might start to scratch yourself like an animal, or crawl around on your knees, or even howling like a wolf. Ow! Can you imagine that you're sitting there meditating for weeks, and then one day you just have this uncontrollable urge to start howling like a wolf. And as you're doing that, your spouse walks in the door. Yeah, that's pretty awkward. And now you got some explaining to do. And they look at you like you're going insane. What is this meditation thing you're doing? It's turning you into an animal. So expect that. I'm not saying that it'll necessarily happen to you, but if it does, don't be surprised by it, is what I'm saying. Also, expect paranormal phenomena to happen to you. What do I mean by this? That means reliving the past, having past life experiences, or seeing the future, having weird deja vu experiences, having full out-of-body experiences where you actually leave your body in a totally lifelike way and you travel to some sort of astral realm or different parts of the world and interact with various kinds of entities. You might see spirits or hear spirits. You might hear weird voices in your head. And they can be totally lifelike. Not imagined, but totally lifelike. You might actually see angels and demons. Again, not imagined, but like standing before you. Completely real as I look to you now, but it's going to be an angel or a fucking demon. Like out of a movie. You might see gods, deities, giant crawling insects, praying mantis people, spirit animals that talk to you, try to tell you things, or maybe that try to kill you, try to claw at you. You might see entities. You might see aliens. You might feel like you're being channeled by some sort of extraterrestrial, or that you're getting abducted or probed. And all these experiences are not just like mere dreams, like a nightmare. It can be a lot more realistic feeling and looking than that. So that's pretty weird, right? It's pretty far out. But all this stuff is possible. And the reason it'll blindside you is because your present model of reality, if you haven't meditated for long periods of time, is that all this stuff is fiction and it's not possible. I mean, how could this stuff be possible? But see, you underestimate the power of your limited consciousness. When your consciousness rises, weird shit that you've never imagined all of a sudden starts to become possible. You start to become a lot more open-minded than you ever thought you would be. And when this weird shit starts happening to you, well, if you have this kind of dogmatic insistence that it's not possible, this is not supposed to happen, then you can imagine the sort of shock that you will be in. Also, you might have Samadhi states. These are quite common, usually quite positive, but also they might shock you a little bit. A Samadhi state is when you actually stop existing as an individual body and you actually merge with objects. Like you might be looking at a lamp and you might actually merge and become that lamp. You might be looking at a car and merge and become that car. You might be looking at your spouse or your children and actually become your children. Literally. And that might freak you out. But generally, this is something that's positive and you're actually should be anticipating that if you're doing serious meditation. You can even have a samadhi experience of emptiness or nothingness, where you merge not with an object, but with nothing. Nothing at all. You might also experience a Kundalini Awakening, which can be a freaky thing. A Kundalini Awakening is when energy in your body gets concentrated and then it sort of shoots up your spine into your head, and then it explodes out of your head, and that can be a very powerful experience. It can be beautiful, but also it can be terrifying because it might feel like you're losing your mind, and you actually have this weird energy moving through you, and you start to behave as though your body is being controlled by a puppet master. Like, you're not even in control of your body anymore. Your body is just moving on its own, and you have no idea what the hell is controlling you. It's almost like you've been possessed. Also, you might experience a total blackout or the void. In Buddhism, one way that they describe a attainment on the path towards enlightenment is something called neither perception nor not perception, which is a state where you're sitting there and you're concentrating and meditating, and then there's like a total erasure of reality. Physical reality stops existing for a while. Now, in physical reality time, that might be just a few seconds. But in your time, as you're sitting there and experiencing this, it might feel like an eternity. Like the entire world has vanished and disappeared, and including your body and including yourself, and you're just sitting there as the void. That might be pretty freaky. Also, of course, expect ego death. If you're serious about meditation, that's probably why you're doing it in the first place, is to experience ego death. So this would be something to look forward to, but also ego death can be scary, can be freaky, because it's probably not anything you imagined it to be. Your sense of reality will get shattered, and it will expand in ways that are beyond your wildest imagination. And the question is, will you be open to that? Or are you not expecting it, and then that will really freak you out? And probably the worst thing that can happen to you is the dark night of the soul, which is basically when you start to see that everything you've ever believed and known about reality is false and completely delusional. And you start to realize that reality is meaningless and purposelessness and purposeless. Has no purpose and has no meaning. And that all your old creature comforts and everything that you attach yourself to, all the meanings that you assign to your family, to your career, to money, to your marriage, to your children, even to self-improvement, even to meditation, even to the pursuit of enlightenment, when you realize that all this is completely meaningless, and you start to interpret that as a negative thing, you can get into this spiral of depression that can get very dark, and it's called the dark night of the soul. Now, this isn't common, but it can happen. And in the worst situation, it can lead to depersonalization disorder, where you actually start to feel like you don't exist as a person, and you interpret that whole thing as negative. But there's ways out of depersonalization disorder, and there's ways out of the dark soul. So again, generally speaking, all this stuff that I'm talking about, you want to treat it as temporary phases, as just arisings or a bubbling up from your subconscious mind of stuff that you need to work through. So none of this is really ultimately negative. It's actually all very positive stuff. But in the moment, for a few days, for a few weeks, it can feel very negative. All right, so what do we do about all this stuff? What's the recommendation? Well, if you talk to a serious meditation teacher or master, or an enlightened master, their advice on this stuff is actually very simple. It's actually very easy to give good meditation advice. Here it is. Firstly, just relax and realize that all this stuff is normal. And that really, it's no different than any other phenomenon that you're seeing around you. Seeing an alien is no different than seeing my face. It really doesn't matter. You're just attributing a different meaning to an alien because it's an alien than to my face. And if you're seeing a demon or an angel, recognize that it's no different than seeing your car or seeing your mother or seeing a chipmunk at the park, right? It's really no different. The only difference is the meaning that you assign to it. And of course, all your meanings are self-constructed, and a lot of them come from the ego. So as you start to unravel your ego, this sort of weird shit will stop bothering you so much, the way it does normal people. So just relax. That's step number one. Step number two, remember, don't get distracted by this stuff. Remember what's going on here is that your ego is trying to maintain its sense of tyranny over your life. It's like you're trying to depose a dictator. So when you're deposing a dictator, what do you think happens? There's resistance, right? He fights back because he doesn't want to get deposed. Neither does your ego. Your ego and your mind and your brain are trying to maintain homeostasis. So as you're pulling towards spiritual higher consciousness, it's pulling back in full force towards lower consciousness, towards egotism. And the way that it does that is by sending these strong negative emotions at you, getting you to be afraid, and by trying to distract you from your ultimate goal. And the only thing you got to do to stay on track is just to keep meditating. That's really it. Stay relaxed, keep your cool, and just keep meditating. If you start to break your meditation habits, that's when you know the ego has really won. Okay, because that's all the ego wants. The ego wants to sabotage you, to get you to stop, so that it can remain the tyrant in power. Remember that all this negative stuff is just a sign of real growth. Real growth doesn't always feel pretty the way you imagined. Newbies think of growth as positive stuff. Advanced practitioners know that growth is tough and that it requires emotional labor. That's what tells you that meditation is real and not just a fantasy, because you are working through, and it takes emotional labor to focus and to keep yourself on track and to not get distracted. Remind yourself that this is a phase. Depression is a phase. Seeing weird entities and aliens and demons and stuff, that's a phase. All of this is stuff you will pass through. It's not going to last forever. Remember to trust yourself. Trust your higher self. Trust your original motivations for why you started doing meditation. If you have a thirst for enlightenment, trust in that. There's something there that will cut through all the bullshit, all the fear, all the egotism. Also, treat yourself with love and kindness on this journey. Meditation is not about disciplining yourself harshly and self-flagellation. It's supposed to be a process of self-love. You're doing this out of compassion and love for yourself. So when you sit down to meditate, be kind, be gentle on yourself, both mentally and physically. It does no good for you to start to argue with yourself inside your mind, to start to create partitions in your mind where you say, oh, this part of me is bad and this part of me is good and the good part needs to discipline the bad part. No, all of that is just more ego games. So a lot of times when I'm very frustrated or I'm going through some sort of turbulent stuff during my meditation, I just remember that, hey, let me just calm down, let me relax, let me accept all this stuff, let me not resist any of it. Because you know what? I know that in the bigger picture, I have no control over it at all. All my negative emotions that come up, I have zero control over it. And when I'm meditating well, I have zero control over that. My only job is just to sit here and to be mindful. That's it. And the self-love is so deep that if I feel like I need a short break, I will take a short break. I will meditate less. You could even stop meditating for a week if you really need to. Like if you feel like this meditation is completely destroying your career and your relationship, make a calculated strategic move to take a break for a short time, but then of course, with always the intention to come back. Because the greatest failure you could experience is if you get fed up and disgusted with meditation, then you never want to come back anymore. Then you've let the ego win. It accomplished its job. And the last thing I would suggest is to read spiritual books. Read books from people who have meditated for decades, who can give you some tips and pointers, and they could keep you inspired. They can keep you connected with your original motivation for why you're meditating. And they could point out the different traps to you and the different ways that you can deal with those traps. So that if you do ever experience a dark night of the soul, for example, you know which book to go to, where there's going to be a bunch of advice that tells you how to deal with the dark night of the soul. You don't want to get caught off guard by that. All right, that's it. Those are my tips. Meditation does have a dark side, but remember that actually the bigger the dark side, the bigger the spiritual purification that you will experience, and the higher your consciousness will ultimately go. So all this stuff is ultimately very positive. So don't despair, stay on track. And if you don't have a meditation habit yet, make sure you install it first thing starting today or starting tomorrow. All right, I'm signing off. Post your comments down below. Please click the like button for me. Share this episode with a friend. And lastly, come check out Actualized.org right here. This is my newsletter and website. I have some resources there. I have a book list. I have a lot of amazing spiritual books that will point out all the different traps on this path for you. So that's going to be super useful for you if you're a meditator and if you're working towards enlightenment. I have a life purpose course there. And just generally, I'm releasing content every single week. New in-depth content. As time continues, my content will become more advanced. And as you do your work and I do my work, together we will have a higher quality degree of teaching and interaction with each other. And the stuff that I will share with you in the future will just blow your mind. Meditation is really just the beginning. Meditation is the foundation. Then when you take that and you add some of the other concepts and methods that I'll share with you in the future, it'll just take you to levels of growth and consciousness that you never imagined possible. So I'm really excited about seeing you get a taste of that, because I've already gotten a taste of that in my own life, and it's just the most amazing stuff. Beyond words. Beyond words. So sign up, stay tuned, and I'll see you soon with more.